So it's an absolute pleasure to see everyone today. I actually don't have a clicker to change the slides. How does that work? Or are they going to do that for me? No worries. That's all right. Thanks a lot. So everyone, this is a really new experience for me, by the way. Normally I'm used to the audience being able to hear me directly as opposed to through the headphones. But so yeah, Ezechi Britton, MBE, or EZ, as most people know me. I'm the CEO of CFIT, UK Centre for Finance, Innovation and Technology. So CFIT is an independent change maker that is there to help drive forwards financial services innovation in the UK. We're backed by City of London and Treasury, and we really sit at that intersection between policymakers, regulators, industry, and academia. And we bring together these sectors in order to solve some of these really key pressing problems facing the UK financial services sector. So the way that we do that is that we put together coalitions. So we look across the entirety of the financial services ecosystem. We look at real critical problems that we think could rely on or leverage innovation in order to help create more jobs, more trade, more inclusion. And then we'll go out, we'll build a coalition. Our last coalition was of over 60 organizations, bring them together over 6 to 9 months in order to actually try and solve some of those problems through building out practical outputs and outcomes. So we'll look at specific use cases, we'll build specific proof of concepts, and off the back of that, we'll show the evidence necessary to demonstrate back to industry, to government, and to the regulators why it's important to drive change in this way, what the government can step in to do, what the regulators could do, and how industry can lead on this to take change forwards. So in this last coalition, we focused on open finance. What we were specifically focused on was how can open finance change the lives of consumers and SMEs in the UK? More specifically, what are the two real tangible use cases that we could look at in order to create actual tangible outputs and outcomes? The first one that we took a look at was how do we support vulnerable consumers? How can open finance, unlocking certain data sets, create better outcomes for consumers in the UK? So, out of those 60 coalition partners we worked with, one of them was Citizens Advice. And by working with them, we had a real look at how do we help Citizens Advice support their vulnerable customers on a daily basis. So today, Citizens Advice support about 370,000 people a year. And yet, 70% of phone calls to Citizens Advice go unanswered. And they go unanswered because their support staff are busy taking consumers through the process it takes to get to a point where they can help them with their situation. And the first thing that you have to do if you contact Citizens Advice is complete the standard financial statement. And that comprises of over 600 data points, which without answering, it's very difficult for them to give that tailored information and support that consumers would need. So what we looked at as a coalition was how could we take some of that data that would typically come from your bank account information, maybe come from other sources such as HMRC, Companies House, DWP, and potentially feed that data into a system in a dashboard, which you can see here, that could actually not only increase that rate at which they can onboard new customers, but help Citizens Advice provide better advice and guidance to their consumers. As a second use case, we had a look at how do we support the SME, how do we support SMEs getting greater access to credit? Ultimately, how could open finance help bridge that £22 billion funding gap that exists for SMEs in the UK? So, again, we looked at our universe of 60 coalition partners, and we focused on a partnership with HSBC, who are very interested in seeing if we could bring in all these data sets through into our credit decisioning process, what would that do to our ability to lend to UK SMEs. So we looked at, again, that wealth of data points, particularly VAT records, particularly company's house inception data, as well as the CRA and transaction information that you might typically have, and look at what would happen if we were able to flow that through into that final decisioning process at HSBC. So what actually happened at the end of that first coalition? Bear in mind, we kicked it off in June, came to an end at the end of last year, and we announced our findings at our showcase just a few weeks ago. Well, it was pretty straightforward, actually. We demonstrated definitively that open finance has the ability to change the lives of people in the UK, has the ability to change outcomes for UK businesses and create better outcomes for individuals in the UK. And we had 5 key findings from that. 1, more SME lending. When we fed open finance data into the HSBC credit decision process, what we discovered was typically you get a yes, you get a no, and you get a whole host of organizations that go through for manual underwriting. Well, of that cohort, 25% of them would have got an automatic yes when it came to applying for credit, as opposed to potentially getting a no. We discovered that Citizens Advice could have supported an extra 150,000 customers a year if they'd had access to more open banking data, open finance data, and had automated that process. To put that into context, that's 40% increase on the number of vulnerable customers that Citizens Advice could have helped if they'd had access to this information. That's over 1 million consumers over the next decade if they were to implement this. Working together, it sounds crazy, but actually by bringing together this coalition of over 60 organizations, we discovered that we're actually able to make change. We're actually able to come together, find solutions to problems that no individual organization could solve. This generates actual impact to the UK economy. 30.5 billion is the value of open finance and the personal data mobility space in the UK if it were to be fully rolled out. And there was one final finding in there, which was around simplification and consolidation. When we look at opening up data like this, it's not about making it free, as in freely available. It's about ensuring that the consumer is ultimately in control of how that data is shared. And one of the things we discovered was that with open banking, we've got clear trust frameworks, we've got consent frameworks, which are absolutely perfect for sharing information one-to-one. But the moment you look at an open finance use case, you're looking at multiple data sets to get to a single outcome. You're then looking at, let's say you wanted to get a loan from HSBC, you'd have to access all those different data sets. Maybe you're looking for a mortgage. There's a whole host of other data sets you've got to give access to. So giving the consumer the ability to easily and safely share that information, give consent in a way that actually creates a better outcome for them, better experience for them, was absolutely core. So off the back of that coalition, we came up with a series of recommendations. 1 and 2 was about how we should be taking forwards these proof of concepts, developing them to full prototypes. If we think about that SME proof of concept that we worked on with HSBC, we want to be able to expand that across to other banks, we want to expand that across to other lenders, we want to explore what other data points would be out there. Rather than just HMRC data, could we get access to accounting information that would make a difference? Number 2 was on that piece around supporting Citizens Advice. We've seen how definitively creating that proof of concept could absolutely change the lives of consumers in the UK. So our second recommendation would be to take that forwards. Number 3, identify a commercially viable option for open finance. If we're going to do this, it needs to incentivize both those who produce the data and those who consume the data in a way that allows us to move from a compliance exercise to a commercially driven one. 4, we need to empower an accountable body to advance open finance. It needs a home. Open banking has had the OBL. We're seeing talks around the future entity at the moment. We would love to see there to be a place for open finance going forwards. 5, set up a consent and authentication working group. I talked about that need to simplify access to data to ensure that users are fully empowered to share their data in a way that creates better outcomes for them. We need to see work done on taking that forwards. And finally, establish a task force to prioritize open finance APIs. As part of the work that we did in this coalition, we prioritized, ranked something like 30 data sets. What we now need to see is an exercise taking that to the next level, prioritizing the actual key use cases so that we can prioritize the commercial models accordingly, so that we can build out those APIs, so that we can get to a position where the secondary legislation for open finance can be put into place and we can fully unlock the potential and ultimately enable that 30.5 billion of value to the UK economy. As you can see, we tackled 2 use cases. We looked at SME credit, we looked at vulnerable customers, but there are so many more. There's an entire universe of things that we could have potentially tackled as part of that coalition. It was a small one, it was 6 months, so we're really excited to explore how can we ensure that industry, that government can take this forwards and make sure that we move beyond just open banking where we are today. And finally, just a lovely shout out to all of our amazing coalition partners. Some of you are in the room, the likes of MasterCard, NatWest, Lloyds Bank, Revolut. You know, we've got big tech, we had CRAs, we had fintech, we had trade bodies, we had regional bodies, we had regulators, all coming together to work together to solve for these problems and really prove the value of how to take this forwards in the UK, how to drive forwards financial services innovation. Thank you. So, with that, I'm happy to open up to any questions around what we did in the coalition, what we're trying to do, what we're trying to achieve. We've got a good 12 minutes left, people still filtering into the room. So I know there's a roving mic around there. I know there's some people who are desperate to ask some questions. So I'm going to open up to the floor. I don't know where the mic is, by the way. Who's got it? You've got the mic. Okay, brilliant. Anyone wants to ask a question? I'll start picking on people otherwise. So there we go, brilliant.
Hi, I'm Avi. I work with Explio.
I actually can't hear him. 1 second. Let me put this on. Go for it.
Hello, you can hear me now, right?
I can hear you now, yeah.
So I'm Avi, working with Explio technology. So my question is, like we have been hearing open banking like for some time. I assume that at least there are some data sets which are available which should enable open finance, right? Mm-hmm. So I want to know how much of it is already available and how much further we have to progress.
So that's a great question. And one of the things we looked at was what's the wealth of data sets out there? And obviously you've got the big ones, you've got your HMRCs, you've got your company's house. But then there's information like buy now, pay later, for example, is a great example. There's local council tax data, for example. There's rent recognition. And I know there have been a number of projects around these things in the past. Some of these data sets are available, right? You can hit a DWP API today. You can hit a company's house API today. The question is the quality of the data that you get back, is it fit for purpose? Does it, what's the word? Is it cross-compatible? You know, can you access one set of data and cross-reference it to another? That suddenly becomes a real problem and a challenge. And one of the biggest issues that we saw, the highest value data sets were government data sets, predominantly because they've been validated, right? So there's a piece there around, you know, how do you get access to, for example, accounting data from an accounting platform, which really feeds in to everything you might submit to HMRC. which is a great proxy, but ultimately the HMRC data has been validated by HMRC, and there's a process that goes through that. So there is a journey. There are data sets out there that we can make better use of today. One of the things that we're exploring with some of our future coalition or phase 2 work, as it were, is some great examples. Leeds County Council have done a whole project on cost of living, and they've got a massive dashboard that allows you to review that, explore that. What could we do around, for example, citizens' advice, working with Leeds County Council, exploring some of those data sets that are already accessible, and see what we could do to take that forwards. Is that a project that makes sense? In the meantime, we've also got to be looking at those other public data sets that clearly have so much value. The Secretary of State for Department of Science, Innovation, Technology announced quite publicly that they feel, the government feels, that we should see more access to public data sets. Fantastic. So let's start to explore those various avenues and see where we can go with that. And Treasury, who we are funded by, we work very closely with, they're very open to that conversation. Obviously, it is a journey to get there.
Chair's prerogative. Obviously very timely, given that many of the powers coming, which will enable open finance, coming through on the Data Protection Digital Information Bill.
Yep.
That reaches the Lords Committee stage tomorrow morning. So how closely are you working? You mentioned Secretary of State at DSIT. How closely are you working with the bill team as that's going through?
So we're very aware of the bill going through, so we work very closely with the Treasury team. We're on the Smart Data Council under DBT, which leads on, which is very well connected with the DSIT team as well. So we're not actively involved in the bill itself, but we're definitely pushing for it to go forwards. Now the key thing is you know, in our conversations with Treasury, highly likely that the bill will go through, and it will get royal assent. That's great. But really what that does is it just sets out that the regulator has the powers to enable this, right? The next thing that then needs to happen, we then need to see the secondary legislation kick in that actually says, well, what does that look like, okay? So there's an element of how does that then progress? You know, you have to have your call for evidence, you've got to have your consultation, open finance, which then comes together to actually put in place those rules for regulation. So when we look at, you know, if I could go back a slide, I would. I assume I can. If we look at some of our recommendations and what we're trying to do here, in terms of establishing the task force to prioritize open finance, data sets, use cases, and APIs, if you look at what we're talking about in regards to the commercial models, really this starts to lay the tracks for that consultation on open finance that you then need in order to put in place that secondary legislation. So that's the journey that we're on at the moment. Any other questions? Got about 6 minutes. I can sing and dance, I can do all sorts. You know, I can stand here all day. Or we can just keep talking about open finance and where we're going next. Okay. Well, then I guess maybe I'll touch on some of our future plans and where we're looking to go. So I've named some of the recommendations there. And we're working very closely with our coalition partners to take some of this forwards. One of the key things we're very focused on is how do we go from the proof of concepts that we've got now in order to actually turn those into real prototypes that are rolled out across industry, actually establish them in the FCA sandbox and do a lot more with them. So one of the key things is what would a fintech challenge look like around that? So that's something we're exploring actively with our partners. The one that we're really pushing forwards on is the commercial working group as well. That's absolutely critical to the next steps. So again, working with our coalition partners to take that to the next level. And then I can't talk about the task force in any real detail, but there's a number of conversations with Treasury around what that would look like as we take that forward. So we're actively engaged on moving forwards a number of these key recommendations as we speak. And then later on in the year, in June, we'll be looking to announce our next coalition, which will probably be focused on something a little bit different to open finance. We're exploring different areas at this moment in time. I can't commit to what those might be just now because I don't want to let the cat out of the bag. but that should be something super exciting. And again, continuing to push forwards on financial services innovation in the UK. So, again, happy to answer any further questions. All right. Well, it looks like I'm led off the panel then.
I have one further quick question myself. You mentioned the Smart Data Council, Smart Data Challenge. I happen to be on that on Thursday afternoon.
Yeah, I'll be there on Thursday as well.
Good, see you there. Vote for me. but also working with HMRC on some of the, because Electronic Trade Documents Act also coming through.
Yeah.
So trade finance. Obviously, you mentioned the SME proof of concept. There's an awful lot of sunk asset aspects which we're looking at potentially opening up. So a new area of open trade finance also potentially becoming viable.
Yeah. So on the ETDA, I think, what was it? It was described as the most important bill you've never heard of, right? And I think that's a really interesting example of how innovation is now really rolling forwards, particularly around this unlocking of data, because that was really about ensuring that digital documents have the same viability. I can't remember the exact words, but
reliable systems. So it's
as paper documents ultimately, so that we can actually move everything online, which then gets us into a world where actually everything online has the same level of identity, as it were, or viability as physical documents. So once we're in that space, we're starting to firmly move towards that world of a genuinely data-driven digital economy. And that's why this stuff that we're doing with open finance is so important. We've already started to see the value that open banking has brought. And I know we've got some people here who have been very, very involved in that. I'm looking at one of them right now. It's giving me a wry smile. But I think it's absolutely critical that we can continue to drive this forwards on the open finance space, because ultimately data, to my mind, is the next frontier for financial services innovation. It's where everything starts. So we've had to put in place these building blocks so that we can get to that position. And as we go forwards, we're going to start to see a lot more opportunities unlocking. And I could talk all day about digital wallets, digital verification, how that all starts to play into this space. You might get a bit of a sense of direction of travel, but that's very much where my mind's going at this time.
Well, if I could ask the audience for a round of applause for Ez, please.